You bring trouble. He was shouting, nothing but trouble. I will not listen. You will get out of my house. Wednesday was still sitting on the sofa, sipping his coffee, stroking the gray cat. Zoria Utranayaya stood on the thin carpet, one hand nervously twining in and out of her long yellow hair. Is there a problem? Asked Shadow. He is the problem, shouted Zernabog. He is. You tell him that there is nothing will make me help him. I want him to go. I want him out of here. Both of you go. Please, said Zoria Utranaya. Please be quiet. You wake up Zoria Polinochnaya. You are like him. You want me to join his madness, shouted Zernabog. He asked. He looked as if he was on the verge of tears. A pillar of ash tumbled from his cigarette onto the threadbare hall carpet. Wednesday stood up, walked over to Zernabog. He rented his hand on Zernabog's shoulder. Listen, he said peaceably. Firstly, it's not madness. It's the only way. Secondly, everyone will be there. You will not want to be left out, would you? You know who I am, said Zernabog. You know what these hands have done. You want my brother, not me, and he's gone. A door in the hallway opened, and a sleepy female voice said, is something wrong? Nothing is wrong, my sister, said Zoria Utranayaya. Go back to sleep. Then she turned to Zernabog. See what you do with all your shouting. Go back to there and sit down. Sit. Zernabog looked as if he were about to protest, and then the fight went out of him. He looked frail, suddenly, frail and lonely. The three men went back into the shabby sitting room. There was a brown nicotine ring around the room that ended about a foot from the ceiling like the tied line in an old bathtub. It doesn't have to be for you, said Wednesday to Zernabog, unfazed. If it is for your brother, it's for you as well. That's one place you dualistic types have it over the rest of us, eh? Zernabog said nothing. Speaking of Belabog, have you heard anything from him? Zernabog shook his head. He looked up at Shadow. Do you have a brother? No, said Shadow. Not that I know of. I have a brother, they say. You put us together, we are like one person, you know. When we are young, his hair, it is very blonde, very light. His eyes are blue, and people say, he is the good one. And my hair, it is very dark, darker than yours even. And people say, I am the rogue, you know. I am the bad one. And now time passes, and my hair is gray. His hair, too, I think, is gray. And you look at us, you would not know who was light, who was dark. Were you close? Asked Shadow. Close, as Zernabog. No, how could we be? We cared about such different things. There was a clatter from the end of the hall, and Zoria Yaya came in. Supper in 1 hour, she said. Then she went out. Zernabog sighed. She thinks she is a good cook, he said. She was brought up. There were servants to cook. Now there are no servants. There is nothing. Not nothing, said Wednesday. Never nothing. You, said Zernabog. I shall not listen to you. He turned to Shadow. Do you play checkers? He asked. Yes, said Shadow. Good. You shall play checkers with me, he said, taking a wooden box of pieces from the mantelpiece and shaking them out into the table. I shall play black. Wednesday touched Shadow's arm. You don't have to do this, you know, he said. Not a problem. I want to, said Shadow. Wednesday shrugged and picked up an old copy of Reader's Digest from a small pile of yellowing magazines on the windowsill. Zernabog's brown fingers finished arranging the pieces on the squares, and the game began. In the days that were to come, Shadow often found himself remembering that game. Some nights he dreamed of it. His flat, round pieces were the color of old, dirty wood, nominally white. Zernabog's were a dull, faded black. Shadow was the first to move. In his dreams, there was no conservation as they played, just the loud click as the pieces were put down, or the hiss of wood against wood as they were slid from square to adjoining square. For the first half dozen moves, each of the men slipped pieces out onto the board into the center, leaving the back rows untouched. There were pauses between the moves, long, chest-like pauses, while each man watched and thought. Shadow had played checkers in prison. It passed the time. He had played chess too, but he was not temperamentally suited to planning ahead. He preferred picking the perfect move for the moment. You could win in checkers like that sometimes. There was a click as Zernabog picked up a black piece and jumped it over one of Shadow's white pieces. The odd man picked up Shadow's white piece and put it on the table at the side of the board. "First blood, you have lost," said Zernabog. "The game is done." "No," said Shadow. "Game's got a long way to go yet." "Then would you care for a wager, a little side bet, to make it more interesting?" "No," said Wednesday, without looking up from a humor and uniform column. He wouldn't. "I'm not playing with you, old man. I play with him. So you want to bet on the game, Mr. Shadow?" "What were you two arguing about before?" asked Shadow. Zernabog raised a craggy eyebrow. "Your master wants me to come with him, to help him with his nonsense. I would rather die. You want to bet? Okay, if I win, you come with us." The old man pursed his lips. "Perhaps," he said, "but only if you take my forfeit when you lose." "And that would be?" There was no change in Zernabog's expression. "If I win, I get to knock your brains out with the sledgehammer. First you go down on your knees, then I hit you a blow with it, so you don't get up again." Shadow looked at the man's old face, trying to read him. He was not joking. Shadow was certain of that. There was a hunger there for something, for pain or death or retribution. Wednesday closed the Reader's Digest. "This is ridiculous," he said. "I was wrong to come here. Shadow, we're leaving." The gray cat, disturbed, got to its feet and stepped onto the table beside the checkers game. It stared at the pieces, then leapt down onto the floor and tail head high. It stalked from the room. "No," said Shadow. He was not scared of dying after all. It was not as if he had anything to live for. "It's fine. I accept. If you win the game, you get the chance to knock my brains out with one blow of your sledgehammer." And he moved his next white piece to the adjoining square on the edge of the board. Nothing more was said, but Wednesday did not pick up his Reader's Digest again. He watched the game with his glass eye and his true eye, with an expression that betrayed nothing. Zernabog took another of Shadow's pieces. Shadow took two of Zernabog's. From the corridor came the smell of unfamiliar foods cooking. While not all of the smells were appetizing, Shadow realized suddenly how hungry he was. The two men moved their pieces, black and white, turn and turnabout. A flurry of pieces taken, a blossoming of two-piece high kings, no longer forced to move only forward on the board. A sideways slip at a time, the kings could move forward or back, which made them doubly dangerous. They had reached the farthest row and could go where they wanted. Zernabog had 3 kings, Shadow had 2. Zernabog moved one of his kings around the board, eliminating Shadow's remaining pieces, while using the other 2 kings to keep Shadow's kings pinned down. And then Zernabog made a 4th king and returned down the board to Shadow's 2 kings and unsmiling took them both. And that was that. "So," said Zernabog, "I get to knock out your brains and you will go on your knees willingly. Is good." He reached out an old hand and patted Shadow's arm with it. "We've still got time before dinner's ready," said Shadow. "You want some other game? You want another game? Same terms." Zernabog lit another cigarette from a kitchen box of matches. "How can it be same terms? You want I should kill you twice?" "Right now you have 1 blow, that's all. You told me yourself that it's not just its strength, it's skill too. This way, if you win this game, you get 2 blows to my head." Zernabog glowered. 1 blow is all it takes, 1 blow. That is the art. He patted his upper right arm, where the muscles were, with his left, scattering gray ash from the cigarette in his left hand. "It's been a long time. If you lost your skill, you might simply bruise me. How long has it been since you swung a killing hammer in the stockyards? 30 years? 40? Zernabog said nothing. His closed mouth was a gray slash across his face. He tapped his fingers on the wooden table, drumming out a rhythm with them. Then he pushed the 24 checkers back to their home squares on the board. "Play," he said. "Again, you are light, I am dark." Shadow pushed his first piece out. Zernabog pushed one of his own pieces forward, and it occurred to Shadow that Zernabog was going to try to play the same game again, the one that he had just won, that this would be his limitation. This time, Shadow played recklessly. He snatched tiny opportunities, moved without thinking, without a pause to consider, and this time as he played, Shadow smiled. And whenever Zernabog moved a piece, Shadow smiled wider. Soon Zernabog was slamming his pieces down as he moved them, banging them down on the wooden table so hard that the remaining pieces shivered on their black squares. "There," said Zernabog, taking one of Shadow's men with a crash, slamming the black piece down there. What do you say to that? Shadow said nothing. He simply smiled and jumped the piece that Zernabog had put down, and another and another and a fourth, clearing the center of the board of black pieces. He took a white piece from the pile beside the board and kinged his man. After that, it was just a mopping up exercise, another handful of moves, and the game was done. Shadow said best of three. Zernabog simply stared at him, his gray eyes like points of steel, and then he laughed, clapped his hands on Shadow's shoulders. I like you, he exclaimed. You have balls. Then Zoria Utranayaya put her head around the door to tell him that dinner was ready, and they should clear their game away and put the tablecloth down on the table. We have no dining room, she said. I am sorry. We eat in here. Serving dishes were placed on the table. Each of the diners was given a small painted tray on which was some tarnished cutlery to hold on his or her lap. Zoria Vetchernayaya took 5 wooden bowls and placed an unpeeled boiled potato in each, then ladled in a healthy serving of her ferociously crimson borscht. She plopped a spoonful of white sour cream in and handed the bowls to each of them. I thought there were 6 of us, said Shadow. Zoria Polanuchnaya is still asleep, said Zoria Vetchernayaya. We keep her food in the refrigerator. When she wakes, she will eat. The borscht was vinegary and tasted like pickled beets. The boiled potato was mealy. The next course was a leathery pot roast accompanied by greens of some description, although they had been boiled so long and so thoroughly that they were no longer by any stretch of the imagination greens and were well on their way to becoming browns. Then there were cabbage leaves stuffed with ground meat and rice, cabbage leaves of such a toughness that they were almost impossible to cut without spattering ground meat and rice all over the carpet. Shadow pushed us around his plate. We played checkers, said Zernabog, packing himself another lump of pot roast, the young man and me. He won a game, I won a game. Because he won a game, I have agreed to go with him on Wednesday and help them in their madness. And because I won a game, when this is all done, I get to kill the young man with a blow of a hammer. The 2 Zorias nodded gravely. Such a pity. Zoria Vetchernayaya told Shadow, in my fortune for you, I should have said you would have a long life and a happy one with many children. That is why you are a good... That is why you are a good fortune teller, said Zoria Utranayaya. She looked sleepy, as if it were an effort for her to be up so late. You tell the best lies. At the end of the meal, Shadow was still hungry. Prison food had been pretty bad, and prison food was better than this. Good food, said Wednesday, who had cleaned his plate with every evidence of enjoyment. I thank you, ladies, and now I am afraid that it is incumbent upon us to ask you to recommend to us a fine hotel in the neighborhood. Zoria Vetchernayaya looked offended at this. Why should you go to a hotel, she said. We are not your friends. I couldn't put you to any trouble, said Wednesday. There's no trouble, said Zoria Utranayaya, one hand playing with her incongruously golden hair, and she yawned. You can sleep in Beelbog's room, said Zoria Vetchernayaya, pointing to Wednesday. It is empty, and for you, young man. I make up a bed on sofa. You will be more comfortable than in featherbed, I swear. That would be really kind of you, said Wednesday. We accept. And you pay me only no more than what you pay for hotel, said Zoria Vetchernayaya with a triumphant toss of her head. $100. 30, said Wednesday. 50, 55, 45, 40. Is good. $45. Zoria Vetchernayaya reached across the table and shook Wednesday's hand. Then she began to clean the pots off the table. Zoria Utranayaya yawned so hugely Shadow worried that she might dislocate her jaw, and announced that she was going to bed before she fell asleep with her head in the pie. And she said good night to them all. Shadow helped Zoria Vetchernayaya to take the plates and dishes into the little kitchen. To his surprise, there was an elderly dishwashing machine beneath the sink, and he filled it. Zoria Vetchernayaya looked over his shoulder, tutted, and removed the wooden borscht bowls, those in the sink. She told him, sorry. It's not to worry now. Back in there we have pie, she said. The pie. It was an apple pie. had been bought in a store and oven warmed and was very, very good. The four of them ate it with ice cream, and then Zorya Vechnaya made everyone go out of the sitting room and made up a very fine-looking bed on the sofa for Shadow. Wednesday spoke to Shadow as they stood in the corridor. "What you did in there with the checkers game," he said. "Yes, that was good. Very, very stupid of you. But good. Sleep safe." Shadow brushed his teeth and washed his face in the cold water of the little bathroom and then walked back down in the hall to the sitting room, turned out the light, and was asleep before his head touched the pillow. There were explosions in Shadow's dream. He was driving a truck through a minefield and bombs were going off on each side of him. The windshield shattered and he felt warm blood running down his face. Someone was shooting at him. A bullet punctured his lung. A bullet shattered his spine. Another hit his shoulder. He felt each bullet strike. He collapsed across the steering wheel. The last explosion ended in darkness. "I must be dreaming," thought Shadow. "Only alone in the darkness, I think I just died." He remembered hearing and believing as a child that if you died in your dreams, you would die in real life. He did not feel dead. He opened his eyes experimentally. There was a woman in the little sitting room standing against the window with her back to him. His heart missed a half beat and he said, "Laura?" She turned, framed by the moonlight. "I'm sorry," she said. "I did not mean to wake you." She had a soft Eastern European accent. "I will go." "No, it's okay," said Shadow. "You didn't wake me. I had a dream." "Yes," she said. "You were crying out and moaning. Part of me wanted to wake you, but I thought, no, I should leave him." Her hair was pale and colorless in the moon's thin light. She wore a white cotton nightgown with a high lace neck and a hem that swept the ground. Shadow sat up, entirely awake. "You are Zorya Polu." He hesitated. "The sister who was asleep." "I am Zorya Poluchnuya. Yes. And you are called Shadow, yes? That was what Zorya Vechnaya told me when I woke." "Yes. What were you looking at out there?" She looked at him, then she beckoned him to join her by the window. She turned her back while he pulled on his jeans. He walked over to her. It seemed a long walk for such a small room. He could not tell her age. Her skin was unlined, her eyes were dark, her lashes were long. Her hair was to her waist and white. The moonlight drained colors into ghosts of themselves. She was taller than either of her sisters. She pointed up into the night sky. "I was looking at that," she said, pointing to the Big Dipper. "See? Ursa Major," he said, "the Great Bear." "That is one way of looking at it," she said, "but it is not the way from where I come from. I'm going to sit on the roof. Would you like to come with me?" She lifted the window and clambered barefoot out onto the fire escape. A freezing wind blew through the window. Something was bothering Shadow, but he did not know what it was. He hesitated, then pulled on his sweater, socks, and shoes and followed her out onto the rusting fireplace. She was waiting for him. His breath steamed. In the chilly air, he watched her bare feet pade up the icy metal steps and followed her up to the roof. The wind gusted cold, flattening her nightgown against her body, and Shadow became uncomfortably aware that Zorya Poluchnuya was wearing nothing at all underneath. "You don't mind the cold," he said, as they reached the top of the fire escape, and the wind whipped his words away. "Sorry." She bent her face close to his. Her breath was sweet. I said, "Doesn't the cold bother you?" In reply, she held up a finger. "Wait." She stepped lightly over the side of the building and onto that flat roof. Shadow stepped over a little more clumsily and followed her across the roof. To the shadow of the water tower, there was a wooden bench waiting for them there, and she sat down on it. And he sat down beside her. The water tower acted as a windbreak for which Shadow was grateful. "No," she said. "The cold does not bother me. This is my time. I could no more feel uncomfortable in the night than a fish could feel uncomfortable in the deep water." "You must like the night," said Shadow, wishing that he said something wiser, more profound. "My sisters are of their times. Zorya Utranayaya is of the dawn. In the old country, she would wake to open the gates and let our father drive his, I forget the word, like a car but with horses. Chariot? His chariot. Our father would ride it out, and Zorya Vechnaya, she would open the gates for him at dusk when he returned to us. And you?" She paused. Her lips were full but very pale. "I never saw our father. I was asleep." "Is it a medical condition?" She did not answer. The shrug, as if she shrugged, was imperceptible. "So, you wanted to know what I was looking at?" "The Big Dipper." She raised an arm to point to it. and the wind flattened her nightgown against her body. Her nipples, every goosebump on the areolae, were visible momentarily, dark against the white cotton. Shadow shivered. Odin's Wain, they call it, and the Great Bear where we come from. We believe that it is a thing, not a god, but like a god, a bad thing, chained up in those stars. If it escapes, it will eat the whole of everything. And there are 3 sisters who much watch the sky. All the day, all the night. If he escapes, the thing in the stars, the world is over. Poof, like that. And people believe that. They did, a long time ago. And you were looking to see if you could see the monster in the stars. Something like that, yes. He smiled. If it were not for the cold, he decided he would have thought he was dreaming. Everything felt so much like a dream. Can I ask how old you are? Your sister seems so much older. She nodded her head. I am the youngest. Zoria Utranayaya was born in the morning, and Zoria Vechnernayaya was born in the evening. I was born at midnight. I am the midnight sister, Zoria Paluchnonayai. Are you married? My wife is dead. She died last week in a car accident. It was her funeral yesterday. I'm so sorry. She came to see me last night. It was not hard to say. In the darkness and the moonlight, it was not as unthinkable as it was by daylight. Did you ask her what she wanted? No, not really. Perhaps you should. It is the wisest thing to ask the dead. Sometimes they will tell you. Zoria Vechnernayaya tells me that you played checkers with Zernabog. Yes. He won the right to knock in my skull with a sledge. In the old days, they would take people up to the top of the mountains, to the high places. They would smash the back of their skulls with a rock for Zernabog. Shadow glanced about. No, they were alone on the roof. Zoria Paluchnaya laughed. Silly, he is not here. And you won a game also. He may not strike his blow until this is all over. He said he would not, and you will know. Like the cows he killed, they always know first. Otherwise, what is the point? I feel. Shadow told her, like I'm in a world with its own sense of logic, its own rules. Like when you're in a dream and you know where there are rules you mustn't break. Even if you don't know what they mean, I'm just going along with it, you know? I know, she said. She held his hand. With a hand that was icy cold, you were given protection once. You were given the sun itself, but you lost it already. You gave it away.